This is Donald Trump, President of the United States. Honestly, I think this is the first radio show I've done as president, if you want to know the truth. And you're listening to the Rick and Bubba Show.
35 minutes past the hour. Rick and Bubba back from the broadcast plaza and teleport. Thank you for being with us today. That liner you just heard from the leader of the free world was set up by a friend of the program, Cliff Sims. When he was part of the team there with the Trump administration. He has written a book a lot of you have heard about, Team of Vipers, My 500 Extraordinary Days in the Trump White House, available wherever books are sold. And Cliff, you know, hey, that when we got to go to the White House, are we going to get to go back?
Are we out?
I know they still love you guys.
Is that over? Is that over?
No, I think you definitely get to go back. In fact, when Hope Hicks took a job, she left the White House, went to Fox to be the communications director. She said she wanted to help the executives over there understand kind of what goes on in middle America. What's middle America about? Because they're out in L.A. And she called me and she said, "What was that show that we did where those crazy guys came in the East Room of the White House?" Right. And I was, they didn't have to say anymore. I said, "Oh, that's Rick and Bubba." And honestly, they still love you over there.
I thank you for mentioning us to people associated with any coverage of the White House. I'm not mentioning you as much now.
Not quite as much.
So y'all the guys that know who? What? Oh no, he's great.
Well, I did notice somebody sent me a link. And it said, Rick with the lead-in said, "Now, Cliff was an acquaintance of the program." I said, "Man, I used to be a friend of the program." That's it.
Remember, there's a difference in friend
Rick draws a real line on the acquaintance friend thing. I kind of lump people together in the friend column.
Right. So
so good.
So anyway, but we do thank you for all of the things that you the coverage you've given the show and the coverage you've given things that we've been associated with from a ministry standpoint, and thank you for the things that you helped us, giving us access to the White House and including us in that.
Yeah, of course.
But
and just as background, Cliff has been a friend of the show before all of this. I guess probably knew you better to begin with, and then I got to know Cliff a little bit better later on, and then you did hook us up with several things and helped us have some access to the president, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah,
that was
of course,
a great.
man.
I talk about that trip and tell that story about how he came in, and we had this plan all along. We were going to be last, and I won't take up the segment with that, but Hope Hicks and everybody had another plan, and we were going to be last because we were taping. And when he come in the door and you were with him, he said, "Rick and Bubba, doing you first." And he did us first.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter what everybody had planned.
Right.
He was a man of his word on that. Yep.
Yeah, no, that was a great experience. And I guess Cliff started something which is still going called Yellowhammer News. And I guess that's when we got to know each other a little bit. And then you had a tie. I think your family was tied to Michael Catt and Sherwood over in was that the trip there was a trip you went with me on to. I was going to speak somewhere and you went with me.
Down in Enterprise.
It was Enterprise.
Was that right?
Okay,
yeah.
I couldn't remember where we went, and you went with me because you had.
Yeah, my family's down there.
It was Enterprise. I kept thinking it was over in Georgia, but it was actually an Enterprise, and so you and I got to know each other a little bit then, and of course you covered a lot of when my wife's book came out, and we're very kind about all of that, and that's kind of how we started developing a relationship and a friendship. And then because of that, and I've said this full disclosure, because we do have a personal relationship with you, I called you and said, "Look, I'm not going to ambush you on the show. Full disclosure, I'm going to tell you some things I'm going to ask you that I think you need to clear up so that people – there's no better way for people to understand where you're coming from than to hear it directly from you.
Yeah.
And when you get on shows and people do sound – we've experienced it too. You go on, everybody says this is what we're going to talk about today. Then you get on, they don't talk about any of that.
Right.
And then they start hitting you and peppering you with questions. And before you know it, thank you for being with us. And you're like, okay, that wasn't what we talked about. And I'm not saying that's always negative. Nobody's ever been negative with us, but they have said we're going to talk about this subject. Then you get on the air, and they don't ask you any of the questions they told you they were going to ask you. So this show is a little more – we got a little more open format.
And I told you, ask me whatever you want. Don't bother me a bit.
But what I'm talking about, you can expand on things here without sound bites and cutoffs and all of that. So I think the thing that is on...
Unless food comes in, then we might cut you off.
Yeah. I think the question that everybody wants to know from you, what was your motivation to write this book?
Well, one of the things that I noticed was, being inside the White House and having been there when other books were written about us, the Comey book, go down the list, the Omarosa book, you name it, was that you had kind of what I would say are three types of books. You had your anti-Trump, I'm going to burn the place down books. Frankly, a lot of them full of nonsense. You have your sycophantic, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to the known universe books, which frankly don't tell the whole truth. And then you have these journalist books, which are reliant on secondhand sources, many of whom are unnamed, that you don't know where they're coming from. I wanted to be the first person who wrote a firsthand account of just the truth of what happened. And that was my only real goal going into it. And I felt like we're at a point now where watching the news, it's impossible to tell what's true and what's not. And there are people in this country right now that think that Donald Trump worked in cahoots with Putin to get elected. They sincerely believe that. They think that we're all Russian agents in there. There are people that think that Donald Trump is the biggest racist in the history of the known universe, etc. And it's all based off of this coverage that I had to watch it all day, every day. And so I want to set the record straight on things like that and give you a real picture of what it's like to work in that place. And I think that's what I did.
Oh, were you a Russian agent, Cliff?
Is
the president a Russian actor?
No. I think that, and I say this in the book, like I think the whole thing's nonsense. I think the whole Russia thing is stupid. I mean, we couldn't collude with the office next door in the campaign, much less a foreign government on the other side of the world, okay? So, yeah, I think it's stupid.
Yeah, you're right. We've talked about this on the show. There's people that think he's, like you say, the spawn of Satan. And then there's people that I call they're in the Trump trance, that everything he does is right. No matter what. And probably the truth lies somewhere in between those two extremes.
Yeah.
And there's certainly great things he's done. And you that's the thing, I guess. I know why some of the news outlets, why their slant was, you must come here and trash Trump or we don't want you here. And it kind of is lost in the fact that actually in the book, now there's certainly people that don't fare well in the book, and you yourself don't fare well in the book at times, and I think that needs to be clear.
Well, yeah, because if I was going to be willing to say the truth about everything else, I better be willing to say the truth about the things that I should have done differently in there, it's been interesting to watch the kind of progression of the coverage of this book, because at first what happened was the New York Times and Washington Post obtained a copy of the book. They wrote a certain type of story, and it fit very neatly into a narrative that they tend to like to, advance. And so people freak out, especially conservatives, like, oh my gosh, this is another anti-Trump book. Right. And frankly, Trump hadn't read the book. He saw the coverage of it the way it was. He reacted the way that he did. Then people read the book, and now I'm getting tweeted at from liberals who are furious because I thought I was getting fire and fury in this book. Right. And now it turns out, Michael Schmerkanish, Republican, media guy, says, like, I think you and Trump are in cahoots to try to get more anti-Trump people to read this book. That's why he tweeted about it. And I'm sitting there as
is this all part of your Russian plan, Cliff?
Right. Exactly.
I never thought about this. So
did Putin now come up with this?
Now people believe that Trump is acting mad about it because it may sell more.
Yes. Right. And it really just comes down to, how ultimately 75,000 people have read the book at this point. More people are listening to this show right now than have read the book. And so I find it interesting to watch people base their opinion of the book off of the same news coverage that they know is wrong about everything else. I'll give you a great example. There are headlines everywhere. Donald Trump says Anthony Scaramucci is on drugs. Okay, there's a line in my book where I'm talking to the president. The very next line is, Trump didn't actually think that Mooch was on drugs. It's the equivalent of me saying Rick Burgess is crazy. Well, I don't think Rick Burgess needs to be institutionalized. Right. Maybe he does, but the point is that they didn't put that very next line.
They don't understand humor a lot of times.
And pun and things like that. But what I'm saying is, but in this soundbite world we live in, so people are going to go in the book and whatever their agenda is and pull out lines and say, well, this is the book. And are you saying you think the president himself
100%
fell victim to that?
No question. There's no question about it. It was a comment. His tweet and his immediate reaction to the book was purely based off of, you read a story in the New York Times, saw the media coverage in a couple of other TV outlets about it, and had some people inside the White House trying to get him spun up about it. That's it.
Have you attempted to try to get word to him that, hey, you need to read the book?
Sure,
that I'm not doing what you think I'm doing as far as you're concerned?
Yes. Yeah,
of
course.
But you don't know whether that gets there or not.
Yeah, this kind of gets at something I talk about in the book, which there are very few people around him who are willing to give him everybody there is always picking their battles. And granted, you got to pick your battles in life in general, and of course with the President of the United States. But no one, if it doesn't benefit them, is going to go to him and tell him the truth about not just this, but a lot of things. And so that's one of the things I try to get at in the book is there's just not a lot of people who are giving him advice that is not self-serving.
All right, we'll come back. Cliff Sims with us. The book is called Team of Vipers, My 500 Extraordinary Days in the Trump White House. So, Cliff, you put the book out. Trump sees the reports, as you talked about. He does a famous Trump tweet. I remember when you were talking to us about when you first started that sometimes y'all sit there every day when he would come down from the living area and you'd be like, what has he tweeted? What and he would love it. He'd almost look back like how you
would.
Yeah. He got fired up by what he would stir, right?
No, there's no question. Yeah, there's a scene in the book where he comes down off the private elevator, and it was after he had fired off the tweet about the host of Morning Joe having a facelift.
Right.
And his first words out of his mouth were, "Did you see it?" And I said, "Mr. President, I think everybody saw it. I'm pretty sure everybody saw it."
And now he's tweeted about you.
Yes.
And so that has led to a lawsuit.
Yes.
Which has led to you with a counter. Tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, so essentially the campaign sued me for, quote-unquote, violating a nondisclosure agreement. The book is about my service in the White House. Okay, so you have a private entity, the campaign, suing me, saying that I broke a nondisclosure related to my time in government service. Okay, last thing I want to do is be embroiled in a lawsuit with anybody. I've never sued anybody in my entire life. But I've
started with a big one.
I did. We're going to do it. Let's go to the President of the United States.
Right.
And so we had to, in order to defend myself, countersue saying that as a government employee, I'm not bound by a private entity's NDA, because ultimately I don't work for Donald Trump. I work for the American people. And so you cannot apply this to a government employee. That's the whole premise of the lawsuit. It's not like I'm going to go get Donald Trump and try to get some money out of him. I'm going to try to get it. Like, no, I just want to be left alone. So they sued me or filed an arbitration claim against me, and so we did that in response.
Do you think, again, why would he be suing you if I understand that the book does not reflect well on everybody in the Trump White House. But for him, he doesn't come out bad in this book at all.
Does he think it's a bad reflection because of the people he's hired
got?
Look bad in the book?
I think that it ultimately comes down to what I said earlier. He's just, his MO, I've been there, I saw it up close and personal. If he feels like somebody punched him, he's going to punch them back 10,000 times harder. That's just what he does. And so it was kind of a shoot first, ask questions later kind of mentality. I don't like this coverage. I don't like what's being said. This book must be another one of these burn the place down books. Let's go at him. I think that's really the bottom line.
Well, let's talk about, because I know that you're a Christian and you've talked about that, and that's some of the things that you were disappointed in yourself about how some things that went on and you realize, hey, I'm kind of compromising who I am, and this kind of pulls people in. Do you think, well, obviously the answer is no, but I want you to clarify it. So you're saying you don't think morally you violated a non-disclosure, like that you went against let your yes be yes and your no be no?
No. And ultimately, I think, so the way that people usually frame this question is, did you violate a confidence with the President of the United States that he felt like there's an advisor here who works for me, that I should be able to say things knowing that they're never going to get out? And what I would say to that is, if you read this book, there are not a bunch of stories in there about Donald Trump where it's like, oh, that's embarrassing, or that's behind the scenes on something he probably shouldn't be, whatever. The stories that I tell about him are trying to help people understand the way he ticks. So the stories I tell make a larger point. For instance, one of the things that's been tough about this is I feel like people have kind of misjudged my motives behind why I'm doing this.
No doubt.
And I totally understand that. Yeah. People don't know me from anywhere. So there's a part in the book where Trump has just moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We walk back to the Oval Office, just outside the Oval Office. You guys saw that TV that's on the wall there. And he looks up at the TV, and people are just burning the Middle East down. I mean, it's like they're hanging him in effigy. Yep. They're shooting at him, stomping on the American flag. And it made me feel kind of embarrassed, kind of like if I saw someone trip on the sidewalk, I would look away because when they look around to see if anybody saw it. So this guy's just getting crucified metaphorically on the TV. His response that I will never forget was, "What's next? What are we doing next today?" And basically made me realize he's getting vilified in the most vile way you could possibly, because these people think he's evil.
Right.
And he let it just kind of go right off his back like water off a duck's back. And I remember that because Donald Trump has a total and complete willingness to be misunderstood. If he feels like he's doing the right thing, he is willing to endure any amount of criticism. And I remember that, and I didn't think about it necessarily in context of this book until kind of everything happened, but that's kind of how I feel about it. There are going to be people in the country that misjudge my motives behind this, think that I was out to make a quick buck, that think I shouldn't have never done this before, and I get that perspective, and I have to be secure in knowing that I came into this with the right motives, and whatever anybody else thinks about me, from Donald Trump on down, I just can't let it bother me. And that don't mean that the ones that bother me are the people that I know, who I feel like I just wish would give me the benefit of the doubt. You know me. I'm not a liar. I'm not a bad guy. Right. That's the ones that hurt me. It's when it's like I feel like my friends come after me, Yeah.
Well, so to answer that question, you don't think like morally that you violated anything in any non-disclosure from a spiritual standpoint. I really don't care about the politics of it or how the world sees things. You as a Christian do not think you violated anything by writing the book.
I don't, because ultimately I think what we need to be willing to do is tell the truth.
Right.
And everything in that book is 100% true as I experienced it. And that's the good, there's some bad, and there's some ugly, including about me. And are there specific things I wish I had written differently here, or I get in the moment, I'm like writing and give you whatever? Yeah, maybe so. But at its core, I'm proud of what I wrote, and I think it is the truth.
Can you hang around one more segment?
Yeah,
we'll do one more segment, then he's got to catch an airplane. By the way, good luck with that.
Have fun with that. Here we have Cliff Sims with us, author of the book Team of Vipers. Cliff, we don't have a lot of time, so I want to get to some of these questions because we want to hear you say it, you talk about it. The general perception is that this was negative toward Trump, even by him and people who have handled, or telling him this. Tell us, in your own words, what you think about President Trump, the job he's done, and him as president and personally.
I think he's a man of extraordinary, once-in-a-generation talent and also massive flaws as a human. And I think that from a policy perspective, people ask me, like, I got booed on The View for saying I was proud for working for Trump. And the reason I'm proud is if you look at the policies, you look what the economy's doing. I know for a fact, having been in there, that the guy really wants to deliver on his promises. He deserves nothing but credit for those things. The things that I wrestled with were more of the moral side of how do you operate in a tense environment like that at that level without compromising your principles? And those are the things in the book where I wrestle with. Like, personally, my shortfallings were things like, the president's frustrated by seeing all these leaks and people trashing him, anonymous White House officials trashing him, and he calls me in off the Oval Office and says, "Who are these people?" And I start naming my colleagues. And in hindsight, I'm like, there's no honor in dishing on my colleagues like that. And at the time, I justified it by saying, well, it'd be better for the president if these people weren't here. And that's probably true. But really, I did it because it would be better for me if these people weren't here, because these are my rivals internally. And so getting caught up in that kind of rat race kind of thing. But
were they leaking, though? I mean,
I didn't lie. That's what I said. Look, I didn't lie about these people. It just wasn't.
You're just
the way
saying maybe your
it.
motivation should have been different, even though you were justified in the correct answer.
The answer was true. I just don't think there's really any circumstance it's just not a good look if Rick is mad about something and gets Adler in the room and Adler's like, well, let me tell you 10 things about Speedy that suck.
Right.
Like, that's like what, there's kind of no honor in.
There's no honor. If you have a
problem, me, buddy.
If you have a problem with somebody, you should have gone to them and say, hey, what's
that's
going,
right.
Yeah, what's going on here is wrong, and I want you to come in. I'm gonna tell the president what you're doing, but I'm gonna tell you first, and I'm gonna tell him. And that. But did you find yourself, because like Bubba's talking about, is it possible to be in this kind of environment, especially as a person of faith, and not compromise and not just become part of what you really were probably had disdain for?
I think there are people like a Mike Pence who I think is the real deal. His faith, I watched it. I mean, he's just a real deal that have risen to that level without compromising. I think those people are so few and far between that I could name them on one hand, 100%. And even myself, who I walked in those doors with, I think a really good foundation and knowing who I was, and even I lost myself in some of that. And I think the challenge is when it's that cutthroat, when the stakes are that high, everyone has this kind of hierarchy of moral values, and your number one value becomes winning. And you are willing to do anything it takes to win. And that means from a policy perspective, that means from an internal rivalry perspective, I'm going to kill them before they kill me. I mean, there's a reason Sean Spicer was gone before me. Okay, I was working on that. Okay, right. Then the day came where somebody was working on me.
Right.
And there's a day I got kicked. So when you get caught up in that, it's so easy to forget that your identity is not in being a White House staffer or a Trump staffer or a whatever your job is. Your identity is in Christ. Right. Those of us who are Christians, and that's where I lost myself. Was I let my identity become wrapped up in the game and what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so that's where kind of that line is.
Well, you and I talked about this privately, but I think because I want to try to get as much clarified today as possible. Mm-hmm. So you said that, and I think that part of the book is actually healthy. To say, look, I got in there and I was sent there to bring light to darkness, and before I knew it, I was part of the darkness. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very raw. We can all look at parts of our life and go, yeah, I can relate to that.
And it's happened to all of us.
It's happened to all of us, and whatever. But and you've been very frank about that in the book. Do you feel like it was your place to out other people, though, for what they were doing?
Yeah, and I wrestled with that during the writing process. Right. So what do I say about these other people that were there? And ultimately, this book is a snapshot in history. We're not talking about me and my buddies that nobody's ever heard of behind it. This is our government, okay? This is like, if you're not able to say the truth, even when it's negative about people, we would have no history books. Okay, so that's kind of the way I was trying to approach this book. This is a history. This is a snapshot in history of what really took place in here, and some people don't come out great in that,
including yourself,
including me.
Right.
But it's all true, and that was kind of when we talk about a hierarchy of moral values. The truth, I think, won out over. And there, like I said in the last segment, there are things about the book that in hindsight I would have written differently, or in kind of the when you're writing and trying to make it interesting and things like that. Maybe I whatever I could quibble about. Maybe I went too far here or there, but like ultimately I just want to tell the truth, and that's what I think I did.
What about the question that everybody will ask? Would you have written this book if they had not gotten rid of you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I would. Because it's not, if you read it, it's not a vindictive book. It's not a like burn the place down, I want to get back at people for doing me wrong kind of book. So, no, yeah, I would totally.
You may have covered this because I haven't read the whole book, and that's the reason why I wanted to be clear and just talk about the things that I do know. But did you cover, what was the thing that led to Kelly trying to say, I don't want you here anymore?
I think it was ultimately, I took it personally at first, but in hindsight, it really wasn't personal.
Well, the first reaction in the flesh is always to take something.
Sure, yeah. But in hindsight, and I kind of walked through this in the last chapter of the book, there were a lot of people who fit my description, which is someone whose relationship with the president preceded his, who, he's a military guy, very hierarchical. Trump's hierarchy is, do I know this person? He doesn't even know what our job titles are. You know what I mean? Right, just like, and so he would feel like out of the chain of command. Trump would, talk to me, things like this. So I think that he chafed at that and with others, not just me. And that ultimately he got consumed by the factionalism that he came to fix. That was part of John Kelly coming in. He was supposed to fix that. He ends up getting consumed by it. All those things combined lead to me being just in another camp, so to speak, than him. Right. And that's
when he came in to say, I got to correct some things. He looked at you as one of the things that needed to be corrected, that Trump wasn't, you were not following what he considered to be the chain of command.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
And he was like, this is what I'm here to fix. And so I'm going to change this relationship you have with the president.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so.
I hear what you're saying. Are you concerned long term that you will be kind of viewed as a kiss and tell kind of guy?
No,
because I say that because a lot of times people don't want to be around a kiss and tell guy because they feel like anything I say could be thrown out, and we deal with that too. Quite frankly,
well, again, this
in a comical way.
There's a little bit of a difference between writing a historical account of what happened in the White House versus me in some random office or me sitting around here with you guys or whatever. I think there is a big difference there. And like I said, these are not stories meant to embarrass the president there are tons of stories that are just silly, like things I don't want to act like I left something out of the book that was like some giant, oh my gosh. But I'm saying that there are things that are not in the book for that reason. That like we're in rooms, things get said, and tempers flare, whatever it may be, and those things people should be able to be comfortable and leave those things in the room. The stories I tell are to help you get inside Trump's head and understand the way he ticks. And so the story would be, here's a larger point to help you get this. So no, I'm not really worried.
And I know you got to go, but say the thing you were talking about how that attitude of winning. He talks about that a lot. And I know all of us are works in progress and whatever, but you were saying, and this can be a good thing because the country has benefited from that, but it can also be a bad thing that in his mind, winning is the ultimate goal.
Yes. And so, again, we're thinking about, like, for all of us, what is our hierarchy of moral values? And it's a difficult thing to realize with, like, as Christians, winning is not our highest moral value. That the ends do not always justify the means. And that's part of what I got consumed by, was the ends did justify the means, whether it was a staff rivalry or so we cheer those things when it's like, well, that's advancing a policy that I support. But that's not the way that we're supposed to live our lives.
Yeah, the Bible actually spends most of its time on the means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you do things? What is your motivation? What is the way you go about it? Mm-hmm. You're right. So really, once again, as usual, Jesus is usually counterculture.
Yeah, no, that's right. And Trump, people ask me about his faith all the time. When I came on the show, when I was working in the White House, and I had to try to thread that needle a little bit because I was working for the guy. But ultimately, I think he is not a great picture of the Christian faith. He has been a great defender of it from a policy perspective.
I think that's probably a nutshell. That's a nutshell. Yeah, because
that's fair.
Because I know you and I had some correspondence when you first got there. Because I was like, all right, we've sent one of our guys in. This is going to be somebody that's going to have access to him, and we would go back and forth on where he looked faith wise. And there are people that are presenting. Sadly, there's the Phil Robertsons, there's the whatever, and you go, okay, that's the gospel.
Yeah.
But then there's also some of this other theology that has had access to him.
Well, so his Faith Advisory Council, where did these people come from? Well, I'll tell you, just like with so much else in Trump world, it came from the TV. He said, if you're on TV, you're at the top of your field, right? Whether you're a journalist or you're whatever, whether you're Rick and Bubba, these guys must be at the top of their field. So he looked on TV and said, who are the preachers that are on TV? Uh-oh. And as you and I know, a lot of those are not. I mean, they're at the top of their field in a manner of speaking, but it ain't the field that we're not, that's where a lot of those people came from. And there's a whole chapter in the book that talks a lot about the Faith Advisory Council and how most of them are concerned with their proximity to power. Just like I was,
Yeah, anytime you see people getting their picture made and behind them is the article on Trump in Playboy, they probably haven't looked around before they took the picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe a better backdrop.
Right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I know
thanks, Cliff.
That's a great time.
And thanks for, as always, giving us an opportunity to have access to the latest thing you have going. The book is out there. It's available everywhere. Read it for yourself. Thanks to Cliff Sims for coming by and visiting with us. And this is another reason why I prefer the format of talk radio to some of the other formats out there. You can agree or disagree with Cliff's answers to the questions, but I think in this format you have ample time to explain and give your answer, and then the audience can decide whether they are satisfied with that or still agree with that. I would say this.
Read it for yourself.
I think the fairest thing that he has said, which is true, is I don't think, and this is not like when you're just trying to listen and get some information, but if you're going to come out and say, I will now give my monologue on Cliff Sims, I don't think you should do that if you haven't read the book.
Yeah. Rick, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little worried about something just based off what I was hearing in the break and everything. I'm afraid Cliff Sims is writing an insider book on us.
I know. I thought the same thing.
And I heard them mention the title Team of Biscuits. So I just don't know about that.
I think Adler's the leaker.
Yeah. No, clearly. Seriously.
By 500 days in the Rick and Bubba kitchen.
I think, I really can relate, and I think we all can if we're honest, what Cliff was talking about, how you can lose yourself. I mean, we're believers. We've all, established that, most of us many, many years ago. but you can, while you're trying to be light to a situation, sometimes the situation can take a hold of the wheel and start driving it. In this case, he was talking about the White House and politics. And to a lesser stage, for all of us, it could be sports. It could be your sport team. I mean, who, boy, here, especially in our state and people we know, that's a biggie. It can get wrapped up in a lot of things. It can be your kids, and it's easy to do. So I certainly can relate to that. Adler, you got something?
Did you guys want that list of things about Speedy that suck now or later? Just let me know, on air or off.
I thought you were doing a book on Greg.
Greg. Why am I always using the example? I've noticed that.
You know what? You know what the one about Greg?
Stop writing.
The one in Greg, he's right about Greg, which is good. You know what it's called? Surviving the Real Greg Burgess.
Well,
I believe, as far as we're concerned, that Cliff had the opportunity to answer the questions that the first things that came up with me, when he did this, and with Bub and with all of us. So we've asked him. He's given his answers. He's told you where he stands. I certainly would say read the book to come to your own conclusions. But I think we asked everything we needed to ask, right? I mean, I couldn't think of anything that we left unanswered. Now, certainly you have and he knows this, and he said he's gotten to the point where he feels like that, other than a few things he looks at and says, which Bubba talked about, we all get through that thing when you're walking the line with anything. You can go back and go, okay, if I could go back and do that a little different, maybe that whatever. But
every one of us do that in everyday things we do.
It really is an everyday
People write
thing.
a second book that was based off the first one just because of that.
Yes.
I mean, you make changes, and I completely understand his point there.
Yeah, but some people, one thing we have to figure out once and for all, I think, especially when you're dealing with somebody as volatile as Trump, and he gets support and he gets criticism with a lot of enthusiasm, both sides. There's no in between. Yeah. But I would for those that think it is a hit piece on Trump, I would say read the book and then come figure out whether you think that or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's.
I think it was spun that way out of the gate, which led to some people looking at that a little wrong.
Well, and of course, you start wanting to get the book out there, so you start getting all these opportunities to come on shows. And I watched probably 5 different interviews of him with what I would consider to be far-leaning left sources, and you could tell that they had not read the book, and they had made up their mind what the book was about. And in that sound bite, like we talked about, cut here, cut there, like Greg said, the only time you really saw him get an opportunity is when he said he was proud to have served with Trump and thinks he should be reelected. And then what Greg considers Cliff's badge of honor.
Got booed by The View.
He was booed by The View and The View audience.
Yeah, if they would have accepted him, I'd have been a little bit skeptical.
Yeah.